prevention of diabetes with type 2. Because there aren't that many studies that say doing it this way in this combination lead to this outcome, except for metformin. Metformin is the only drug that has clinical data behind it that says that it is first line. Okay. So this is out of the a joint statement between the European Diabetes Group and the American Diabetes Association have put this together. What I like about it is that running down this left-hand side, it gives you monotherapy, dual therapy options, triple therapy options, and then using a combination of either oral agents with a insulin or using an oral agent with a GLP-1 agonist. The other thing they do that is good is that they tell you efficacy, hypoglycemic risk, the effect on weight, the side effects, and then the cost, and it's relative. Okay? So you see with metformin, its efficacy is very high. Its ability to lower blood sugar is very, very good. Its hypoglycemic risk is low or nil. It's neutral on weight, and in some people it will cause a slight weight loss. Its side effects, common one is GI, the most serious lactic acidosis, and its cost is low. We don't do it on this one, but I think in the text it says that if they're at below, like above 7.5% A1C, less than 9%, start with this. I'll tell you my opinions on that a little bit later. Dual therapy, then they're saying is you're going to continue the metformin. In diabetes, it is rare that we take things away. We usually add to their treatment regimen. So you can add a sulfonylurea, you could add a TZD, you could add a DPP4 inhibitor, you could add an SGLT2 inhibitor, GLP-1 receptor agonist, or you can add insulin. So you can use almost anything in combination with metformin. Then it gives you the same thing. How efficacious is it? What is the risk of low blood sugar? What's the impact on weight? What's the major side effects? What's the cost? Then for triple therapy, it's the same thing. You can stay on metformin and the other drug that you have combined with it if you've had some clinical effect and the patient can tolerate it, then you may go to a third drug. As long as they have an A1C less than 8%, a third drug makes sense. If an A1C is above 8%, it doesn't make any sense to go to another oral agent because they don't have the power to lower the blood sugar to goal. So at that point, if you're above 8%, you're at 2 drugs max, your best bet is to go to insulin or to add a GLP-1. The problem is that most patients know that there are other oral agents out there, so there may be a reluctance. About the only time I add a third oral agent is when I've got patients who are just not ready to start insulin. But I always put short timelines on. Here's how long we're going to go. Here's when we're going to look at it again and make another decision. Okay, that's how this is set up. That's how you can use it. Questions about that? Okay, let's go back now and look at the drugs. My feet are killing me, so I'm going to sit down. Where am I doing it? Okay, so the front starts with prevention. So prevention is key. It's really, really important. Surely you've gotten that by now. I've made my case. So studies have shown that preventative interventions work. And the way that they work is they delay the progression to diabetes. So I've told you that if you have prediabetes, your risk of getting diabetes in the next year is 20%. That's high. What if someone told you had a 20% risk of getting cancer in the next year? Would it scare you? Yes. So it's high risk. So eventually, think of it as a continuum. From normal blood sugar to slightly abnormal to abnormal. It's just a continuum. we have set down artificial standards and says this is normal, this is prediabetes, this is diabetes. And we did it by looking and following people who had blood sugars in these ranges and looking long-term as at what happened to them. Well, people in the prediabetes range had a higher incidence and long-term outcome of higher cardiovascular effects. People in prediabetes tended to move into diabetes over a period of a few years. People with diabetes are at the higher risk for getting these complications. That's how those artificial guidelines have come down. In the 10 Commandments, there's nothing that says diabetes is a blood sugar greater than 126. Okay? So there's nothing in stone. There's nothing laid down from God that says this is when disease starts. It's people, through time, studies, large populations have said, here is where risk lies. So realize that they are somewhat artificial, that we are saying here's where disease is, but it is based on what happens to those people long term. So, lots of prevention studies have come out. If you look just down the list, I've listed a lot of them, and I don't mean that you are supposed to know all these except one, the DPT, because it's the mother lode. The first one was out of China, the Queen, and what they did is they looked at a large number of people with type 2 disease. And they did, if you look under A, they looked 6 years. They looked at the impact of diet, exercise, and diet plus exercise. And look what they found out. They could reduce the progression to diabetes by 30 to 45%. That's big. That's big. You have saved a person at least 1 year of diabetes or 2 years of diabetes. That's good. That's big. Other studies, the Finnish diabetes prevention study and the diabetes prevention study that was done in this country have almost identical results. Finnish do a great job with their studies, so it should be paid attention to. So let's look at the diabetes prevention program. This one was one of the probably the middle ones. There have been several big ones that have been done to this point. But what they've done, when you look in Finland, you don't have a lot of ethnic groups. So they're all Caucasian people. So in the diabetes prevention program, what they did is they said, we're going to take older people, so middle-aged and late middle-aged, 60-year-olds as well, and we're going to include the different ethnic groups in this country to represent the population of the United States. They had about 3,500 people. And they followed them for 3 years, and they did 3 things. They put some into a placebo group, because they're what do we call that group? Control. So that was our control group. To another group, they gave intensive lifestyle instruction. Here's what you need to do to lose weight. Here's how much you need to exercise. Here's how you need to change the composition of your diet. And then they had another group that they put on drug, which was metformin. And they followed those people out for 3 years, and here's what they found. Lifestyle rocked. If you did the lifestyle, it was so much better than a drug. Isn't that what America wants to hear? It's better to lose weight. It's better to exercise than it is to take a pill. Is that what you think all your patients want to hear? Heck no. No, they want to know a pill is good. But, so lifestyle, that's why I'm always pounding it home. Foundation matters. If you go and build your house without the foundation, it will fall down. If you do not address the foundation pieces and problems with diabetes, you will have to use more drug and multiple drugs, and you'll get to insulin sooner. Almost all people with type 2 eventually end up on insulin, about 75%. Because of beta cell dysfunction over time, they'll get to the point where they can't produce enough insulin. But if they can do lifestyle changes, they may be able to put that off or to delay it. Okay. So what did the lifestyle do? The good news is it was baby steps. It was little. It wasn't huge things. They didn't tell people, you weigh 250 pounds, you need to weigh 110 pounds. They didn't do that. They lost 7% of their body weight. Okay? So if you weigh 200 pounds, they're asking you to lose 14 pounds. That's doable. That's doable. Most people can sit there and go, okay, I can do that. It's not a lot. Just that small amount of weight reduction paid off big time with their blood sugar. Exercising 150 minutes a week, 30 minutes a day. These were middle-aged people. They weren't running marathons. They were walking 3 to 4 miles per hour. Okay? All of you all can do that. And so they did that, and then they changed their diet. They lowered the fat content in their diet. So people who did all three or they had a 58% relative risk reduction. That's huge in the progression to diabetes. 50% of the people achieved a 7% reduction in weight. That's amazing. That's really good. 74% maintained greater than 150 minutes of exercise per week or greater. Yay! It can be done. So that showed lifestyle works. Metformin, 31% reduction in progression. So you couldn't beat it with a drug. So other studies have come along and looked at that. The Torabon study, the Indian DPP, that's the Native American side, all saw risk reductions with lifestyle. So those are the lifestyle studies. It's just one, it's multiple, and I'm only giving you 5 of them. There's more of them out there. So then studies looked at medications. Could medications do it? You know what? A drug company can sell more drug if it can show that it can reduce the movement from prediabetes to diabetes. And I don't mean that in a bad way. So the tripod study was one of the older studies. It used a group of drugs that are still around, the TZDs. And they did it, I think theirs was done in women who were gestational diabetes and followed them out. That drug is no longer on the market, but others in the class are. The STOP type 2, the NIDDM is the old designation for type 2 diabetes. With acarbose, a drug that's fairly hard to take, they still got a 25 to 36% reduction. With in the DPP, the metformin was at 31%. In the DREAM study, they used rosiglitazone, which is another TZD, found a 10 to 25%. The bad thing with that drug is that it just has too many side effects that are too difficult to deal with, so not a great one. The Indian DPP, the metformin, there was 26% reduction, so very similar to what we saw with the one done with the whole population. Orlistat is a drug used to lose weight. It's over-the-counter now. It's called Ally. 37% reduction. So very similar. Did I leave the Act Now in there? I took it out. Okay, so it was about what I put in here, 70%, 72%. The big problem is that the weight gain and edema was very high in that group. So we're going to give you this drug, and we want you to decrease your risk of diabetes, but we're going to make you gain weight and give you fluid retention. Oh, it's a hard drug. Okay, so lifestyle works, drugs work. So in the treatment, if you're going to treat somebody with prediabetes, counsel them about weight loss, counsel them about exercise, and it's usually things doable. Most people can work up to 3 miles an hour. That's a 20-minute mile. Monitor them for the development of diabetes. So at least once a year, if you have counseled them and they're not under your active treatment, for other things, then seeing them back in a year and rechecking their blood sugar. Treat them for other risk factors. Remember that slide I showed you this morning? I told you I didn't put in the packet. It was the green one, and it showed at the bottom the macrovascular and the microvascular. The macrovascular threshold is low. It's like around 5 to 5.5%. So the risk for macrovascular disease starts at a much lower blood sugar abnormality, or even in the normal range. So treat cardiovascular risk factors. Lifestyle is the treatment of choice, but metformin may be appropriate in some patients. I've listed them out there for you. The American Diabetes Association now recommends that metformin be used in addition to lifestyle changes in the highest risk for getting diabetes. So these you should know. So if they have impaired glucose, fasting glucose and impaired glucose tolerance, they are the most likely to get diabetes in the next year. So if they've got that, if their A1C is over 6%, if they're under the age of 60, if they have a positive family history, low HDL, high triglyceride, know those risk factors. It'll make a big difference. You will see a lot of these people. Who to use metformin in and who not. Metformin is still pretty cheap, or it is cheap because it's generic and it's easy, and it's tolerated by most people. Got prediabetes? Okay. Good glycemic control. So how do we know what good glycemic control looks like? How do we know how far down to treat people? It's based on large studies. The landmark study in diabetes is the DCCT. It was probably done before you all were, most of you, were you born in 93, Zane? The year you were born was the year this study came out. They started recruiting people in 86 and 87. It was type 1 diabetes. And up until that point, there was a great debate on whether you needed to normalize blood sugars or not. Did you need to get them as close to what is normal, or did it matter? So when I was in training, like you all, most physicians tried to get the blood sugar under 200 because then people weren't symptomatic. Okay? So all those symptoms of hyperglycemia went away for the most part because the kidney, the renal threshold for sugar is about 180. So if you can keep people below the renal threshold, their symptoms of hyperglycemia are nil, small. So, and the outcome was, if your sugars are high, the worst thing that can happen is that you develop all these complications. So do we need to put all this effort into making people's blood sugars normal in order to prevent complications? So that was the big question. So they designed this study, recruited patients, put them in it for about 6.5 years, only type 1s. They had two groups. They had groups that were primary prevention, meaning they didn't have any complications yet. And they had a secondary prevention group that had some degree of complication already. So they already had some retinopathy, they already had some nephropathy, already had some neuropathy. They were too young of a group to have cardiovascular disease. So this study mostly addressed microvascular development. Now, in those groups, primary prevention and secondary prevention, they subdivided them to two other groups. And they put them into intensive insulin therapy, and with the others, they put them into community care type of insulin therapy, traditional. At that time, it was pretty traditional to put people on 2 injections of insulin a day. Okay? Intensive insulin therapy takes 4 to 5 injections a day. Okay? In community care, at that time, the average blood sugar, or the average A1C was about 10.4%. When I started in family medicine and we figured out what they were doing with diabetes and how they were treating it, you know what our average A1C in that population was? We had 622 diabetics. Our average A1C was 11.4%. In 1 year, we got the average down to 8%, just by sheer, doing all the things you need to do to educate and treat people. Okay, so you got these two groups. So you've got, it's important because it changed the way we treated diabetes. Right, Mary? This sucks. This is terrible. Primary, secondary. I never said suck until I had a teenager. And he used it all the time. Mom, that sucks. Okay, so we have traditional, and we have intensive. And we have traditional, and we have intensive. Okay? So the people in the traditional kept seeing that they were enrolled in the study, but they kept seeing their primary care provider. So they got what we would consider usual care. So it's the care that most people in the community were getting for type 1 diabetes. The intensive folks, not only did they take 4 to 5 injections of insulin a day, they had a team. So you've heard it takes a village to do things. They had a village. They had 5 different types of providers assigned to them. So they had an endocrinologist, they had a nurse educator, they had a mental health specialist, they had social worker, and they had a dietitian. Okay, 5 people, and those people stayed with them and coached them through and worked them through all the difficulties they had and getting them to the best of control possible. So 5 people were teaming them all the time. So this was a big controversy, and it was a big criticism. People said, that's Cadillac care, we can never do that. It's unrealistic. Well, here's my opinion. If you're going to show a difference, you have got to go all out, because if it was kind of quasi, well then what have you shown? So yes, they did Cadillac care, but it proved the point. So the people in the intensive care were able to achieve, for the most part, an A1C of 7%, or right under that. Okay, that's where our goal comes from. They attempted to get to 6%, but the amount of low blood sugar that occurred was too much, and too bad of an impact on the people with diabetes. Okay, so this group got it as well. The average in the traditional, so anytime you put a spotlight on it, things get better. So they weren't 10% anymore. The average in the traditional was 9%. So the difference is 2%. A1C, 7 versus 9. What did I tell you? 1% of an A1C translates into how much blood sugar?
25 to 30.
25 to 30. So the difference in their blood sugar was only 70 to about, well, let's see, 50 to 70 points difference. That's not much. But that small difference made a huge difference in the development of complications. Look in that paragraph. 70, so their main goal was reduction in retinopathy. They looked at the other, but that was their primary. So 76% relative risk reduction in the development of retinopathy, 34% in kidney, in nephropathy, 60% in neuropathy. That was huge, big. Look at the secondary prevention. These were people who already had complications. They slowed it down. 54% relative risk reduction in the progression of retinopathy. 43% reduction in nephropathy. Okay, big, really big. It's finally answered the question. Yes, good glucose control makes a difference. So it has made all the difference in the world. It set goals that that were achievable, that allowed people to reduce or avoid complications. It spurred the drugs companies to come up with all kinds of medications to treat diabetes. So there was a financial incentive as well. So this was big. This was a really big study. It was type 1 diabetes. What percent of the diabetic population does that make up? 5%. Well, so what does this mean for type 2? It is rare that we will take the results of a study and extrapolate them to a big population that wasn't included into the study. We don't usually do that. Now remember I told you that hyperglycemia is the denominator here, that no matter how you get there, it still causes the same trouble. So what they did is they applied that to type 2. So we have the same standards for type 2 that we do for type 1. Our glycemic goals are the same regardless of whether you have type 1 or type 2. So, huge study. So that's where the 7% comes from. There were other studies. The Kumamoto was a Japanese type 2 with insulin, found very similar. The UKPDS was started in the late 70s and ran for about 20 years. It was done in England, and they were looking at type 2s, and they were looking at, they only had 2 drugs. They had insulin, they had sulfonylureas. They added in other drugs as they became available. But they were looking at, can you do the same in type 2s? Can you lower the risk of complications? But they also wanted to look at, were there certain combinations of drugs that did better than others? They didn't find that. They found that whatever got the blood sugar lowered was equally of value to another regimen that got the blood sugar lower and improved the glycemic control. The one thing they did find is they found a 25% reduction in microvascular complications, different from what you had in this one, but it was an older study. The people that came into the study had had diabetes for a lot longer period of time. So some of it you can attribute to that, but the fact that there was a significant reduction with microvascular disease was huge. They had a subgroup that was called the metformin. It's the UKPDS number 34. And with them, they looked at metformin when it became available, and they put people into it. And this is the study that proved or showed or gave evidence that metformin in an obese population was the best drug to start with. So that's why metformin carries that evidence that says it's first line unless there's a contraindication to the use of the drug. All right, so that's where our goals of therapy. So going over to page 3. Yeah.
So, in your practice with low resource patients, did you notice when they were having access to the Cadillac model?
So we kind of put together our own, maybe a Ford, but of course we were paid by the College of Pharmacy, so we didn't have to generate enough, and we didn't have to generate our income. We generate the money to run the service, and we billed on the average of about $750,000 a year. We would get back about $250,000 because you never get as much as you bill. So it was enough for us to operate. We could buy our supplies, and we paid for a dietitian. So we had a dietitian full time. The center had a social worker, so we could pull that in. So we were able to make use of resources that were within our building, and then those that were somewhat outside our building to pull that together, to provide this kind of intensive care. So when you're in primary care, some of the problem is that these folks are not a 7-minute visit. Our visits were an hour with new patients, at least, an hour to 2 hours, and our returns were about 45 minutes. So you don't get that anywhere else. That's how we were able to get our blood sugars down. Plus, we started to influence the community of health. So we raised the issues about why aren't our people going to get their, their eyes checked? Why aren't you looking at their feet? So we started looking at the system of care and devising a system that worked. And that's usually what it takes. It's usually the system and what you're putting on people and asking them to do that usually gets in the way. So we devised a system of care within a system that addressed the problems that the system could not do itself. I think that on the next page I have covered most of the information about hemoglobin A1C, but it's written out there in a little bit more detail for you. Okay, so under goals of therapy, if you look at the bottom of that page, getting people's blood sugar under 7% will do a lot to prevent or delay the onset or the progression of microvascular disease. So there's 3 big microvascular complications. What are they? The what? Eye, kidney, nerves. Okay, those are your 3 microvascular. And macrovascular is heart, stroke, gangrene, amputations. Okay, those will fall in there. So under 7% you can delay and prevent microvascular. Macrovascular is another thing. It isn't all tied to blood sugar. It has other things that go along with it. So blood pressure, their smoking, their lipid status. So while you can do a lot to prevent with blood sugar alone, you can't do it totally based on sugar for the heart. So, bottom of that page, so they found this 7%. They locked onto it in the ADA, the medical community, and its practice started to change. Well, people kind of got overambitious. It's like, well, let's see if we can get this low, and so they came up to a big study called the Accord, which I think was published in 2008. And all of a sudden what they found was that if you use a lot of drugs and you get their blood sugar down very quickly in older people, they start dying of cardiovascular disease very quickly. So that started to make people relook at what they were doing and in what population. So they were rapidly lowering blood sugar in a population that probably had underlying cardiovascular disease. And so you were precipitating more cardiovascular events than you were preventing. So the state, now the way the ADA, and they put it together the big consensus papers for the most part. The way they look at it now, and I think this is a healthier approach, is that A1Cs need to be individualized. So our goal for a diabetic community may be less than 7%, but you are going to have people who are able to get down to 6%, 6.5%. If they can do that without high risk of low blood sugar episodes, then you should be able to do that. If you're young, if you have don't have complications already, I wrote them down, short duration of diabetes, long life expectancy, no significant cardiovascular disease, they can achieve better A1Cs. The way I take that is that if I get a young person, I am going to work hard to get them under as good a control as they can tolerate without lows. That's important. Some of the doctors over at Family Medicine used to say, I don't know why you're in such a hurry to get their blood sugar down. It's like, well, I know why. I want to save all their organs. I want to keep them healthy as I can, or as they can tolerate. On the other side, next page, there may be times when you want to go a lot less stringent. So there may be times where the A1C is better served for that person to be in about the 7.5 to 7.9 range. So this may be people who have a limited life expectancy. Perhaps they don't have the intellect, the desire. They may have a lot of complications. I had a young man that I took care of for a long time that had cerebral palsy. He couldn't communicate very well verbally, but he used a device that he could communicate electronically with you. But the ability to try and get him under 7%, he was in his early 30s when I first started seeing him, was just impossible. And he'd wake up with a lot of lows. So we settled for him at 7.5 to 7.9%. Kept him out of lows, but it kept him below that range where microvascular complications are more likely. So there are times where a more less stringent A1C is much better for the person and better tolerated. So kind of keep that individualized goal versus the overall goal for a community. So how often do you do it? So you can do an A1C every 3 months. Because remember those red blood cells, their half-life is about 120 days. So quarterly makes sense. Particularly if you're changing medicine, titrating medicine, their blood sugars are improving or they're going downhill, that makes sense. You get people stabilized and they don't tend to have hospitalizations or illnesses or non-adherence that interferes with their ability to get good blood sugar control, then twice a year is fine. The recommendation for your quality care is at least once a year. Okay, so you can meet all those. In the center, that, or right above that picture, so all the major trials have shown a 1% decrease in A1C. So an average decrease of 25 to 35 milligrams per deciliter can reduce complications by 30 to 35%. That's huge, huge. Two of the first people I ever saw as a pharmacy student, I hadn't even graduated, but in my 3rd year we did a lot, and I went through an accelerated program that was 5 years and 4 years. So my last year I spent a lot of time on the wards, mostly hospital practice. First 2 people I was ever assigned to see one was a lady who came in with advanced diabetes who was losing part of her foot. I was with her the whole 6 weeks. The other was a 20-year-old. She was probably 25, 26 years old. She had had diabetes. She was type 1. She had probably had type 1 for about 10 or 15 years. She was already blind. She was already on dialysis. And I don't remember why she was admitted. But that was pretty common back then because we didn't have finger stick blood sugars. There was no meters. You used urine to try and guide therapy. And we had insulin that was not like we have today. We didn't have the analogs. We had animal source insulin. So the ability to have good control that would prevent those was non-existent. That was 81. So a lot has changed since then, and you just don't see those advanced complications as much in those really young folks if they receive some care. Okay, so on your blood glucose goals, here's the things you need to remember. Normal fasting or preprandial blood glucose, again, 70 to 90. Our treatment goals for fasting are 80 to 130. So it's different for treatment versus what we consider normal. I often have students get hung up on that or miss that. So if you are using a drug to treat blood sugar, your fasting goals, and we also use those for preprandial before meal, is 80 to 130. Everybody catch that? Okay. Now, if you're checking after a meal, sometimes we'll do that, then the goal for a 2-hour is either less than 180 or less than 140. The ADA takes a less stringent goal of less than 180. The endocrinologists take a stricter goal of less than 140. If I can get people under 180, I'm happy, but I'll keep working them. If I get them under 140, I'm really happy because their A1Cs will fall in line. And they won't have those big excursions. I think the next is redundant. Okay, let's take a short break. Let's come back at 15 after. We'll start with that.